President Brown, are you on the phone with us? Commissioner Field, are you with us?
I am.
Thank you. Assume President Brown will be with us shortly. We will call this regular meeting, the Montana Public Service Commission, to order. The time is 9:30 a.m. on, the 13th of September, 2022. We are in the Bollinger Room at the office of the Montana Public Service Commission in Helena, Montana. We will begin with asking all of you to rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. Now I would recognize Commissioner Pinocci.
Like all of us, to have a moment of silence for Queen Elizabeth, who saw energy in her country go from almost no electricity at all to electrifying the whole country, spanning her life nearly 100 years.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinocci. For the record, Commissioners Pinocci and O'Donnell join me. I'm Vice President Johnson in the Bollinger Room. Commissioner Fielder and I believe President Brown are with us, and President Brown has joined us, are with us remotely. Move on now to public comment. Is there anyone in the room who wishes to make public comment? Who's going first? You know the drill. Introduce yourself and have at it.
My name is John Hines. I'm Vice President of Energy Supply, Environmental Function, as well as Montana Government Affairs.
Good morning. My name is Shannon Heim. I'm the Director of Regulatory Corporate Counsel at Northwestern Energy.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I won't take much of your time today. I know you guys have a very busy schedule today, but this is an extremely critical issue for us. I was in fact scheduled to be speaking over to our Leadership Northwestern class this morning, and after seeing the modifications to the rules that really there hasn't been any discussion about whatsoever, felt it very compelled to come here and speak to you about the effects of these. The rules and the RFP process are very critical pathways for ensuring Montana to have an affordable and reliable power supply in the state. And as we see throughout the West, including the Midwest recently, the tenuousness of us being able to have a reliable power supply system is becoming more and more, I guess, on edge. And the affordability portion of this is actually becoming more and more critical as well. And the reason why I mention those two things is that I'm very concerned that the language that has been inserted without due process, from my perspective, really drives us toward an outcome that is not in the best interest of Montana. And I'll speak to it in more detail in just a moment. But the way I look at these rules, modifications to these rules, there's two outcomes that could be coming out. One is that we're going to be going to short-term market purchases. Why is that a problem? Well, we've seen substantial increases in market prices over short durations that add up to substantial dollars for our customers. In fact, over the first 6 days of September, over the Labor Day weekend, we had to go out for around 275 megawatts of power purchase. And that cost us our customers over $12 million. As an aside, if we'd have been able to be running a gas plant at that point in time, that it was still to be constructed, it would have saved our customers around $10 million per year or per those 6 days, even with the added gas prices. So the other piece of it is having QFs be the other alternative to short-term market purchases. QFs would, as is currently the situation, are able to bypass or not be part of all of these procurement rules, competitive solicitation processes. If they come in, we have to offer them a contract, and it's a federally mandated obligation that we have to do. The only negotiation piece is price and term. So those are the two outcomes, as I see it, the most probabilistic outcomes after looking at these modifications. And just so, you know, when I joined this company in 2005, it's getting to be a long time ago, I basically had one objective when I took this job, and that was try to rebuild the energy structure in Montana from the debacle of deregulation. And deregulation basically put all of the energy options out on the open market except for QFs. You know, that was a blunt instrument that was used at that point in time. The blunt instrument was 397, the legislation that was passed. There can also be more subtle effects, unintended subtle effect consequences from certain changes. And I would argue before you today that the unintended subtle consequences of the rulemaking associated with 597 is putting us down that path again. And it puts me in a position where I don't believe the utility has responsibility for running the portfolio. It actually takes the commission just to a high degree out of the guidance structure of overseeing the utilities procurement practices. The two entities that have substantial amount of additional oversight and control, which I don't think has ever been intended by public policy, is for the Montana Consumer Council, where they hire their independent or RFP administrator, and the advisory committee, a self-appointed advisory committee representing different public sectors, but it certainly doesn't represent our customer base, nor do I believe it represents the individuals who vote for the commissioners. So we're putting undue weight to certain sectors and taking away the responsibility with these modifications from the entities that have oversight. You guys right now have extreme amount of oversight from our procurement plan that we put before you to our RFP process. And then ultimately, whatever resources that are selected out of that RFP process, you have oversight on that as well. And while there certainly are modifications that need to be done, that can be done and probably should be done to continue to have an evolving and more strengthened process in Montana, I think that the modifications that have been submitted again in a very rushed manner are not to the best interest of Montana, and certainly not in the overall policy view of Montana, where the utility has the opportunity to own generation in concert with other parties, being able to have an equal footing on benefiting or being part of that process. So just again, I promised I'd be quick. Shannon is going to talk about some of the details in the legislation that we'd like to have some new consideration placed on. But the definition, I can tell you a few things, the definition of affiliate transactions, the vagueness of the terms in there. Just let me speak to those two concepts for a moment. Affiliate transaction, from our perspective, makes it very difficult for the utility to participate at all in developing a resource or putting forward a resource in the competitive solicitation process. What does that mean? It means things like coal strip. It means things like a joint venture with a green product, you know, whether it's battery, solar. It means a solar or a hydro project like the Tiber Dam or a pump storage project. Those become off the table. And instead, again, we're going back to market purchases and QF projects. So that is something I'd really urge you to be cautious about taking this. I don't know what flexibility you have in delaying this today, but it's not going to, this by itself will not be a solution to where we're all trying to improve our processes. What it's going to do is lead itself to more litigation and probably additional legislation, or at least an attempted additional legislation to take what 597 intended to do and have it be more responsive to what the new paradigm of the markets that we're operating in is reflective of. And by that, I mean, as we join more and more regional markets, those regional markets are setting definitions for a lot of the things that we are asking the advisory committee and the market monitor, not monitor, but the RFP implementer to be making decisions on. Those aren't really going to be in their bailiwick. RAP, the Western Region Adequacy Program, they're going to be the ones setting a lot of these criteria. They're going to be the ones setting what an appropriate reserve margin is. They're going to be the ones setting how much capacity accreditation does a wind plant get. And putting the way this legislation reads now, or rulemaking reads now, is that we're putting those in absolute conflict. So I would urge you to at least delay so there can be some additional conversation on this. And as a representative of the utility who oversees both government affairs and the supply function, I would commit to you right now, I do commit to you right now, if we're able to put this off for a while, that we as a utility would be willing to sit down with legislative sponsors, with the commission staff, and any other interested parties to either try to make these rules more compatible to where they were just a few weeks ago, or modify the legislation with some suggestions for next coming session. So that's the conclusion of my comments. I appreciate you having the patience to listen to me. And then Shannon, if you have some specifics.
So in my view, the commission really has three options today. You can not take action on the rulemaking today and hold the rulemaking open so we can fully vet the rules that were just distributed less than a week ago until January. There is a moratorium. If you don't vote today, you need to hold until January. But there is a lot of work to be done between now and January to fully vet these. So that is one option. The other option, which I strongly urge you not to take, is to vote the rules as drafted. I'd like to walk through some of the reasons why I think that is a bad option. There are things in the rules that I think are very vulnerable to MAPA. There are issues that I think will trigger a lot of litigation surrounding the process and the RFP outcomes that I don't think the commission is really intending to do. There is a third option. And in my view, the third option is to pull back the most problematic parts of the rulemaking. And what I will identify what those are. I have a red line version of the rules that you could consider. And move forward with some of the rulemaking. It's not perfect. We don't love it, but it would perhaps thread that needle where you could vote today and have some movement, but defer some of these bigger issues that haven't been fully vetted so that we can all have a conversation and develop a common understanding on some of these issues. And I do have some proposed red lines in hard copy if you'd like to see them, but I will just quickly walk through them. Our concern is that there are items within the new rules that have not been vetted. The Montana Administrative Procedure Act, MAPA, and commission precedent, in our view, really require the commission to renotice and publish the rules for further comment. We are 2 years into this process, and to take a left turn less than a week before you vote on them is really bad process. It's just not the way the commission has previously acted in the past, and we don't think it's in your best interest or the best interest of the planning rules. Adequate notice is the touchstone of MAPA's rulemaking process because it is the mechanism that guarantees that all stakeholders and the administrative agency share an understanding of the rule changes and the underlying reason for them. Absent a full vetting of rulemakings, the opportunity for unintended consequences are high. And in the context of supply planning, none of us, not the commission, not staff, not the stakeholders, not the utility, and least of all, Montana customers can afford lengthy delays in procurement of critical capacity resources. The APA guidance, this is on the federal level. This has been litigated a lot more extensively on the federal level. Courts have found that the final rule must be the logical outgrowth of the proposed rule. Such logical outgrowth does not occur if regulated parties should have anticipated the change was possible and should have filed their comments on the subject during the notice and comment period. Or, and I think this is particularly important, language, quote, if regulated parties would have had to divine the agency's unspoken thoughts or where the rule is surprisingly distant from what the agency first proposed, end quote. I really do think there are big chunks of the new proposed rules that are vulnerable because they are distant from the last version and they came out in such short order from today's vote. Northwestern urges the commission to withdraw some of the new language at a minimum to allow parties and the staff to continue to vet and understand the potential ramification, including the unintended consequences. As John indicated, the affiliate rule, the very specific language that we would urge the commission to pull back is the last clause. So the definition defines affiliates as, quote, a person or organization attached to a utility. And then the last clause, through the existence of a contract. So any contract with the utility, so any QF would qualify under this definition as an affiliate of the company. That's nonsensical. It doesn't work for us. And honestly, I don't think it would work for QFs either. So that language should be pulled back out of the definition. The next issue is the role of the third-party administrator. The new draft conflates the independent monitor that the MCC may hire at Northwestern or MDU's expense with the third-party administrator who is designed to work as a partner with the utility to administer the competitive solicitation. The rules insert the word independent in some places, but not all. And there is no definition for what that means. The potential for what the litigation that could come out of that, what does independent mean? How independent must a third-party administrator be is really problematic. And we would suggest that concept in and of itself is not what was intended by the statute and really is something that the commission should pull back. The modeling requirements are the next thing I'd like to talk about. The new draft includes a section, this is new rule 6.2D, that itemizes new broad requirements for modeling. And this is narrative and data related to the modeling, not the actual modeling itself. The volume of data that it appears to be requiring would overtake the planning process. We would have to hire additional people to generate this volume of modeling. And frankly, that's at our first blush. This is new language to us. It has not been vetted, has not been discussed. And I have real concerns that the process of the plan, like all of the detail will overtake what we really are trying to achieve and what the commission wants to achieve. And so this is one of those items we think it's better to pull back, delete that subsection, which is, it's 6.2D, just delete that section and move it forward for more comment. That's one that should take more comment. The next item is the non-scoring criteria. New Rule 6, Part 3D, subpart 2 in particular, has non-price scoring criteria must be based on a clear objective rubric that reasonably enables bidders to self-score. Northwestern strongly urges the commission to strike this language. It sounds good. It sounds great that you have a rubric to score like you would a school essay, but we aren't talking about objective widgets that you can, if it's so long, so wide, costs so much, here is the result you will get. This is a subjective, complex process that not only are you grading the one item, but they get graded in relative to a portfolio. They have to work together, and then that portfolio has to work within the larger utility portfolio. And so this is language that does not exist in other rulemaking, other rules in other states related to procurement. We honestly don't know what that process would look like, and it's not reasonable to expect that those criteria could be pondered and incorporated into a simple scoring matrix. And honestly, it will potentially trigger extensive litigation. We self-scored. This is what we got. You scored us something different, or we didn't win. By our view, we should have won. And now we're going to go to court, and the court's going to have to look at our self-scoring versus utility scoring versus the actual outcome. And what we end up with is a never-ending cycle of litigation and no resource acquisition, which is the worst of all worlds. And I'm sure not at all what staff or the commission intends. I also want to flag related to scoring criteria, the disclosure of a scoring matrix for RFPs is fraught with the opportunity to game the process by bidders. That's why it's not required in other states. The purpose of the third-party administrator and the MCC independent monitor is to ensure that the process is fair and transparent. Allowing bidders to game the process increase the cost to the utility and to customers, and ultimately we view probably skews the results. Actually three things, sorry, but quickly. There is an increase in review days that was increased without really any notice or discussion of why they were increased other than to increase the time. The new rules increase review time for stakeholders. This is in the RFP context from 45 days to 70 days and from, I believe it's 30 days to 55 days for the process without any particular demonstration of need or value to the process. Stakeholders have already suggested that Northwestern's plan is out of date by the time it's published. So significantly increasing the number of days for the RFP process will exacerbate that issue, not resolve it. So we would urge the commission to stick with their initial timeline. The word probabilistic is used in, I believe it is Rule 2D. That word has a lot of particular meanings. There are capacity accreditations based on historic performance that are not probabilistic. So randomly throwing in vocabulary is really problematic and is an example of something that we would have discussed and caught had that language been offered for comment and vetting previously. So we would encourage you to strike that. I'm not recommending necessarily striking language regarding transmission, but I am troubled by the insertion of the element of transition or transmission facilities and capacity into the planning process. It's not that transmission shouldn't be a big piece of the puzzle. It's just that the way that it is incorporated into the plan requires an extensive amount of data, and virtually it requires us to include everything. It's the entire kit and caboodle of what every element and every piece of the transmission system that could possibly be upgraded. And I don't know how we could turn a plan around every 3 years with that type of a requirement. And there's been no discussion about it and no demonstration that it would actually produce anything useful to the process. So I think it is, again, a good example of where we just have not vetted all of the new language and the new rules and the new requirements. I have no doubt that they were put forward with the best of intentions, but unintended consequences are intolerable in this scenario, in this situation.
Shannon, if I may, just on the last issue, to give you an example of the unintended consequences. So we'd be devoting all those resources to something that the regional adequacy program right now does not allow us to account for any transmission upgrades as a capacity contribution to our system. So it's, again, we're having a huge disconnect between what the plan should be doing to what our competitive solicitation should be doing, and putting so much emphasis that can derail the whole process on the plan up front means, again, we're in that circle, as Shannon noted, that we're planning, litigating, but we're back at the two fundamental precepts. We're either in the short-term market to try to meet our energy needs, or QF projects that are outside of this whole project are coming in the door. And that's a great way for me, at least, to sum up what our comments are. And thank you from my perspective for your patience in listening to us.
Well, and just one other comment, the commission recently opened a resource adequacy docket, and it seems to me that some of these core issues are issues that work in the macro, not just for Montana, but also in the region and have regional implications. And so some of these items are appropriate to continue down the rulemaking path in this docket, in the open docket, take advantage of the record that's already been set to deal with the language that could be pulled back, that should be pulled back in our view. But issues like transmission and how do you reconcile regional planning with state needs are something that are appropriate to discuss in that open docket also. But I do appreciate all the work that's been done. I know the commission is under an incredible amount of pressure to move this forward, and we appreciate the effort. We just want to be helpful and make sure that that effort meets the goals and the needs of the commission, the utilities, the stakeholders, and customers, and not the opposite.
Thank you both very much. Are there other public commenters? Mr. Green? Welcome, Mr. Green. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, my name is Mike Green. I'm outside regulatory counsel for Montana Dakota Utilities. And I won't belabor the point. I will certainly echo and join in all of the comments that the representatives of Northwestern Energy submitted about the specifics of the rule. But I wanted to step back and this process has been a difficult one. It's been a long and arduous journey. As we've gone through this process, there's been a lot of public comment, and at the end, it feels very, very rushed. So I once, when I was a baby lawyer, very eager to provide answers and be responsive to my partner's needs. I once had a mentor say to me, Mike, I don't need an answer. I need the right answer. Commissioners, this is not the right answer. This is certainly an answer, but I'm not sure of the question, and it's not the right answer to the question that has been asked. This is not the proposal that was put forward to the public for comment. This is not the proposal that was put forward to the legislature for review, and it does not, from my perspective, comply with the requirements for MAPA to provide an opportunity for public comment. And I've been doing this for about 23 years now, and when an agency has done substantive revisions like this as part of the rulemaking process, it has always issued. I'm not aware of any substantive changes along the magnitude of this that have gone into an adoption notice without going back out to public comment. Now, I understand the legislature has created some impediments and timing challenges with this new October 1st deadline, but commissioners, that's not a reason to rush this process and get a half-baked product to go to the legislature that will have, I think, some real intended problems, but also have a potential cascade of unintended outputs and outcomes that we haven't had a chance to fully vet. So with that, I'll be more blunt. I would encourage the commission to put off this rulemaking, direct its staff to reissue. If it wants to move forward with these proposals, it should at least direct its staff to reissue an adopted notice, which we could then talk about, seek additional public comment, and have issued after the moratorium expires the first of the year, and allow a full participation and a full vetting of this language. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Are there other public commenters in the room? Ms. Arnold, welcome back.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Robin Arnold. I'm with Renewable Northwest. Renewable Northwest is in support of staff's recommendations to the changes to the rulemaking. We don't feel that these go quite as far as we would like to see them go. However, we do believe they are a good compromise between the last published draft and what was originally drafted. We say it doesn't go quite far enough because there are still a lot of loopholes in these rules. For example, the independently administered competitive solicitations that you've just heard so much about only need to be used whenever practicable and are subject to 69.3.1207, which, as the commission is well aware, only applies to pre-approval of resources. It also allows for exceptions for opportunity resources. So we feel that is still very broad language. It does not seem to indicate what the utilities have claimed, that only short-term or QF purchases could be made. It still allows purchases and acquisitions without the use of competitive solicitation. So that is one area where we're still concerned. However, we are willing to live with these rules. We do appreciate the clear guidelines for scoring within the competitive solicitations. Other utilities have acknowledged, other regulatory bodies, I should say, have acknowledged this, including the Oregon Utility Commission, which has stated that PGE should not try to keep their competitive solicitation scoring criteria secret. And they are not convinced by the gaming of the rules argument. Also, I will add concerns about the resource adequacy program conflicting with these competitive solicitation and resource planning rules are somewhat unfounded. The Western Resource Adequacy Program is not intended in any way, shape, or form to override state authority over resource procurement. States still have very broad authority over what resources are acquired within their states. And I know this because I'm a co-chair on the program review committee for the Western Resource Adequacy Program. So I'm very familiar with this program. While things like transmission solutions may not apply to the capacity accreditation to comply with RAP, the RAP again is not supposed to be an end all be all for resource acquisition. States very much retain all of their authority over what resources a utility can acquire. And I'll just end by noting the legislature has had a chance to review these. ETIC discussed it last week when they met. They had several concerns with the previous version of the draft. However, they seem to accept staff's recommendation. While it hasn't pleased everybody, that's probably a good sign that it's a middle of the road compromise solution. So I would encourage commission to adopt staff's recommendation as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Are there other public commenters in the room? Other public commenters? Zolnikoff, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Daniel Zolnikov, Zolnikov. I just drove over here, so forgive my attire, please, if you will. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'm going to start again with the intent of the law. There is a need for a plan. And then once you identify the plan, or you identify within that plan of 20 years, what do we need in Montana? You put in a competitive process. The problem I was trying to solve was competitive process was unclear. It was behind the scenes. Nobody knew why a resource was selected. So why would people, entities, even bid if they know that it seems that the utility always selects their own resource? And there's no clear process. You don't see the weighted scale behind it. You don't know what's important, how it's weighted, what the list is, what is going to win, what's going to lose, what's a very important thing. You don't even have a chance. You put in your bid, you hope, and you lose. And so what I heard from lots of developers was, yeah, we don't even attempt anything in Montana. These laws look like they were written decades ago. They're not the high standard that almost every utility in the entire country uses. So I said, whoa, let's fix this process, have a more open process. When they do the 20-year plan, what's that based off of? Where's that information? How do we know what is created off of? That's really important information. And then when you do the actual competitive process, what is the weighted scale? What are the most important things? Is it reliability, capacity, other things? What is the factors that they're weighing that they need? Why should that be hidden? That won't lead to litigation. This is the typical process for RFPs. So let me give you an example. The state got a few $100 million of ARPA money for broadband. You know what they have? In that process that they're doing right now, they have a checklist of this scores at this percent, this scores at this percent, this scores at this percent. So when you go in and you do your bid for that money, be it the small telcos or the charters, they know what they are bidding in and at what it's weighed at. And then they say, well, we can't do that. I guess we're going to get that 5% discount or that we're not going to get those scores, we're not going to get these scores, but these ones we think we can get because we can beat on price here, but we can't really expose ourselves in this way. And you figure out where you likely will settle, be like, well, we'll get a 73 on that out of 100 score. That is a normal process. That's not pie in the sky. That's what we're doing right now for hundreds of millions of dollars in Montana. So let's talk about the rules. They weren't discussed as a comment I just heard. Well, they were. There was the previous rules from October 2021. Then the new rules came out, which then the process is there's comments, and then you have changes based on the comments, and then you put in the newest version of the rules. These are the newest versions of the rules. I've read the rules, and there's a lot of comments that in the rules that respond to the comments of the people here who have commented on the whole process. So I submitted comments, other entities submitted comments, and the staff recommendations discuss those comments, what made sense, what did not make sense, what was within the law, what was not within the law. So the rules, they were discussed. This is how the process works. This isn't anything crazy. This isn't out of this world. This is the next step. And the rules that were put forth are a compromise between the original ones and the last version. So a lot of this has been seen before. So yeah, the due process argument, that doesn't make sense. You might as well say any amendment in the legislature that's thrown out there right before it's voted on, no due process. That's the same argument. This has had due process. These have been out a week. ETIC has seen these, the newest version. Staff spent 20 minutes going over them, explaining them, walking through them to ETIC. You know, people objected in ETIC, none. That's because they thought it hit legislative intent, because it does hit legislative intent. The problem is the previous rules were a great approach to not enact the law. That's why the entities who supported it liked those ones, the utilities, because they did not enact the law. This enacts the law that the same utilities fought against. So I heard another argument. Well, the Consumer Council, why are they the ones that are involved in overseeing the third party? You know why? Because when I had the bill, I discussed this with the utility, and I had it be the Public Service Commission, and they said, well, maybe we should take it out of the hands of Public Service Commission, put it in the hands of the Consumer Council. I said, okay, that's a compromise. I'll negotiate. You know, we can find the middle right there. Now I just heard that that's a problem. That was me giving in to the utility, compromising, trying to find some common ground. That whole law, yes, sat down with the utility and worked on along with all these other entities. Did they like it? No. Did I try to find out what was a problem, what could work, what couldn't work, and work through that? I did. And I made a lot of amendments and changes, and I agreed to those, even though I would say it definitely weakened the law, it still implemented the law. So now to hear that thing I compromised on is a problem, what's the point of even having a conversation if what I did for goodwill turns out to be a problem? It's not a problem. It's just an excuse. It's more fear mongering. So process, not rushed. The right answer is to vote down these new rule changes. I've read them. They implement the law. You literally can read the rules and how they point to the law. They are implementing the law. That's the whole point of these rules. It clears up a process. So people will come in, bid, know if they've won or lost, why they've won or lost, what's important on the weighted scale, and call it good. Not bid and say, man, I hope that I hit the tiny little target behind the other target, and hit it right. Oh, by the way, I lost and the utility won again. So that leads me to the next point. The affiliate transaction. Why is this important? Say you're running a bid and you have all these people put in their bids, but you're running it, the whole process, but you also have your own bid with another entity. Shouldn't you maybe not oversee that process? Shouldn't you make sure a third party group's overseeing it to make sure you're not biased, that you don't select the thing in which you can profit off of? That seems like common sense to me. But apparently that's a problem, because that common sense might prevail and a third party might choose the one that wins, not the one that you're affiliated with. So this removes any bias. This is a very clean, positive approach, not a negative approach. So yeah, the third party monitor is supposed to be a third party monitor with affiliate transaction. That's extremely important. I want to reiterate, ETIC did not oppose these. They heard this version of the rules discussed by staff, broke it apart, not any opposition. They were concerned about the previous version, like last month's version. That was what people were concerned about because that did not implement the law. Last part was the modeling is now supposed to be open to the public because it's in a black box. If it's all in a black box, you don't know what's weighted, what the scale is. When you're doing the plan, there's no point in doing it because you don't know what it's based off of. Is it heavy on weather? Is it heavy on needs? Is it heavy on what outside resources are doing, what you're expected your resources to do, any future problems, any future expectations of energy, where it's going to go, what's not going to be creating energy, what you might be taking out of your portfolio, what might be putting out there, any changes. Don't you want to know all these factors? I would say yes. And shouldn't this be open to the public? Yes. So again, scoring is done in almost every RFP. ETIC did not oppose. The process is not rushed. This is very normal. This is how the process works. You had the original hearing after the rules were submitted. Now you're looking at what was amended based on comments. You have these rules that have reasons of why there's commentary and what they're implementing. It's not out of this world. This is implementing the law. So I get it. There's been fear mongering. They're saying, oh, we'll never do another competitive solicitation ever again. That doesn't make any sense. This is meant to scare you because this works in other states. So I get it. The sky is falling. There's all these problems that are being pointed out. But, I've heard these for 8 years. The sky hasn't fallen. This is just going to clear up a process to make sure that the Public Service Commission, is finally in charge for the first time in 20 years. That's it. These are your rules, your guiding rules. Some of them can be changed. The sky's not falling. It just lets you do your job, which is all I've been trying to do for 40 months or 55 months since the creation of this bill came into play. And these rule process has been being pushed through. So please support this so you can do your job. The process is clear and fair, and it actually works for the first time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zolnikoff. Are there other commenters in the room at this time? Anyone else in the room wish to offer public comment? Do we have anyone on the line? We do not. And we will close this portion of public comment and move on to our agenda, beginning with action items. Item number 1 would be approval of commission minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion? Commissioner Pannocci moves to approve. Is there a second? Moved and seconded. Are there any corrections or additions to the minutes? Any corrections or additions to minutes? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Action item number 2, request for out-of-state travel approval. Mr. Rosequist.
Good morning, Mr. Vice President, Commissioners. Staff requests approval for Brooke Umstead to travel to Cleveland, Ohio, October 23rd through the 28th, to attend the fall conference of the NARUC Staff Subcommittee on Accounting and Finance. Brooke will be monitoring the activities of this committee to assist the commission in staying on top of accounting and finance matters affecting public utility regulation. Attendance at the conference will allow Brooke to meet the subcommittee's members and learn more about the committee's activities. This conference will focus on current accounting initiatives, standards, and projects at the Financial Accounting Standards Board, or FASB, relevant to public utilities. It will also address emerging issues at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and emerging trends in electric, natural gas, and water industries, including taxes. The expected cost of this out-of-state travel is approximately $2,235, and staff recommends approval, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. Rosequist. Is there a motion to approve? Commissioner O'Donnell.
I move to accept staff's recommendation for this travel.
Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner Pinoche. Is there any discussion of the motion to approve staff's recommendation on this out-of-state travel?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say that, last week we adopted our strategic plan for the agency. And I think it's an important lens to use as we look at where we prioritize our resources going forward. And I believe that this proposal here, as I looked it over prior to the meeting, is directly tied to our goal 4 in our action plan, and that is to increase staffing proficiencies by identifying appropriate training and helping our newer staff reach level 2 or higher on the career ladder. So I'm pleased to see the way this was put together and that we have interest and that we're beginning to, in my view, this fits with the plan very, very well that we set forth that our staff helped us identify. So I definitely support the motion. Appreciate staff's willingness to attend and bring back this knowledge to help increase the proficiency of the agency overall for better regulatory effectiveness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Is there further discussion of the motion? Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Rosequist. Moving on now to work session items, beginning with item number 1 in docket 2022.06.071. Mission initiated pipeline safety rulemaking. Mr. Hamilton.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. We'll start off easy on rulemaking this morning with pipeline safety. The Commission previously noticed this rulemaking on August 5th, 2022. It was not contemplated for a hearing. We received no comments, no requests for a hearing, and so indeed we are ready to adopt this as final rulemaking. It simply updates the date of incorporation of the most recent federal safety rules for pipeline safety. Staff's recommendation is to approve the draft notice of amendment as included in your meeting materials with any changes that may be required by Secretary of State that are non-substantive in nature.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Is there a motion from the commissioners? Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Yeah, I would move to accept staff's recommendation to update these pipeline safety rulemaking requirements. Thank you.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Commissioner Pinoche. Discussion of the motion? Is there any discussion? Hearing none, call the question on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Moving on now. Work session item number 2 in docket 2020.04.053 Northwestern Energy application for Townsend propane annual adjustment. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, this matter is coming back to the Commission, having been referred to Agency Legal Services Bureau for the appointment of a hearing examiner. The hearing examiner conducted a very brief process here in order to arrive at the conclusion that there was no active dispute between MCC and Northwestern Energy on behalf of Townsend Propane. Accordingly, in your meeting materials, you have a proposed order that resolves all the remaining issues. All that remains for the Commission to do here is to decide whether or not you would like to approve the proposed order as drafted. If the Commission does approve this order, we will issue a notice of Commission action that will resolve the docket entirely. At this point, because there is no continuing conflict between the parties, no issues remain in dispute, staff's recommendation is to approve the proposed order as drafted. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Is there a motion? Commissioner Pinoche.
I'd like to move that we adopt staff recommendations.
Approval moved by Commissioner Pinoche. Is there a second? Seconded by Commissioner O'Donnell. Is there discussion of the motion? Discussion of the motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So what we're voting on is whether or not to accept the decision that was made by the administrative person. I get all that. I wish I had had an explanation of the math here. It seems like the cost per therm and per gallon goes down by from the 1st June 30th of this year through September 30th, which is what, 2 weeks now. October 1 through February 20th of next year, and then March 1 through May 31 is significantly less. So it looks like there's a 20% reduction on the cost of the propane, but an almost 30% drop in the cost to the customer. And the math seems murky to me. I'm sure it's gone through people who really understand this stuff, but for voting on something, I just for the future, I'm sure it's fine and it benefits customers. I think it's notable that because of the natural gas and therefore propane costs that we've seen increase so dramatically or drastically, that this reflects the cost going down in the future also precipitously. And I think that's worth noting on that thing, that people who are looking at the future are saying that the commodity is going to cost a whole lot less. That's good news for everybody. But I will support this motion to adopt this. But I would ask in the future, when we go through this route, that there be more explanations of the math on this. Thank you.
You, Commissioner O'Donnell, is there further discussion of the motion? I want to thank the commissioner for coining a new word today, domestically. I will have to keep that for future use. Is there further discussion? None, call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Now, I would ask of the commissioners, if there is no opposition, I would like to switch the order of the next two items. Let's go ahead and deal with PURPA rulemaking and save the 597 discussion for the last item. Is there any objection to that from commissioners? No. All right, then we will do that. We will move on to what is listed as item number 4, docket 2021.09.118, commission initiated PURPA rulemaking. Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, commissioners. Yesterday afternoon, via email, I circulated the most recent and updated version of the proposed, the draft notice of adoption and amendment for the commission's PURPA rulemaking. As you're all aware, this has been a long process, not quite as long as House Bill 597 rulemaking, but still one that has involved a lot of back and forth with parties and informal rulemaking that led to the commission's notice of proposed rulemaking, which was published on August 5th of 2022. We then received comments, both written and oral, at a public hearing. Those comments are detailed for you in the draft notice of adoption and amendment. In addition to the comments and the responses that staff has prepared as the proposed responses to those comments, there are a couple of changes to the rules as proposed in the original notice. The first change is shown in paragraph 4 of the draft notice of adoption and amendment that adopts some of the parties' recommendations in the new rule concerning voluntary mediation. It excludes commission staff from the ability to be appointed as a mediator. That will preserve the integrity of the mediation process by ensuring that the commission does not have a sneak peek at what the parties' mediation positions are or potential settlement positions may be. Additionally, Rule 1901, the definitions rule of our PURPA rules, has been incorrect for some time in that it omitted a word from the definition of production profile. We didn't catch that on the first run through, but we have caught it on this version, so you'll see an amendment to that definition as well. With that, there are no other suggested changes or included changes to the rules as a result of this draft notice of adoption and amendment. So if you approve this, staff will go ahead and submit it to the Secretary of State. I would ask, as is our normal practice now on rulemaking, that staff be delegated authority to approve non-substantive changes required by the Secretary of State's office. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that commissioners may have.
the chair would entertain a motion to approve issuance of notice of adoption and submit this rule to the Secretary of State. Commissioner O'Donnell,
So move, Mr. Chairman.
is there a second? Been moved and seconded. We approve staff recommendation in this docket. Is there discussion of the motion? Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. I am guessing that we may have some protracted discussion on this next docket. So I think we'll take a 10-minute recess and so we'll reconvene at 10:35. right, look at that. We're back exactly on time. We are back in session and we will now move to the work session item published is number 3 in docket 2021.0.007, implementation of House Bill 597. And I assume Ms. Gobert, you're going to lead off.
Good morning, Commissioners. Today's work session pertains to the House Bill 597 rulemaking. The Commission held a hearing on this docket on August 16th with a written comment deadline of August 22nd. The Commission received a significant number of comments in this docket, and staff has revised the rules in response. Staff circulated a draft notice of adoption and repeal last week, so I won't go through every single change, but highlight some of the major revisions. And those include requiring utilities to acquire resources through transparent, independently administered, competitive resource solicitations whenever practicable, subject to MCA 69.3/1207, changing permissive guideline language to specific requirements in both the resource planning and procurement processes, adding requirements for the utility and advisory committee work plan, including a structured process for written inquiries and questions to the utility during the planning process and responses by the utility in that process. Requiring reasonable opportunity for bidders to predict how their bids will be scored on both price and non-price factors, to provide transparency and fairness in the competitive solicitation process, symmetrical 70-day processes in both resource planning and procurement, and providing a longer public comment period for both, and more detailed information regarding computer modeling using provisions in a previous draft of the rules. Staff would recommend approval of the draft notice and to authorize staff to make non-substantive changes as required by the Secretary of State. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gobert. As my colleagues know, I'm not a big fan of just open-ended discussion in these proceedings. So I would prefer to have the chair entertain a motion and then move to discussion if one of my colleagues would care to offer a motion here. Commissioner Pinoche.
I'll make a motion to accept staff recommendation.
Been moved to accept staff recommendation and submit the rule for publication to the Secretary of State. Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion?
Mr. Chair, yes, I'll second Commissioner Pinoche's motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. So it has been moved and seconded that we approve the rule for submission to the Secretary of State's office. Now open the floor to discussion of the motion. Commissioner O'Donnell.
So we heard testimony from two different points of view on this matter. It was stated to me that this was an attempt to reach a compromise. A compromise to me is where both sides get some of what they want, but perhaps not all of what they want. They shake hands and they say, you know what, we're okay with this. Obviously, it is seriously not okay with one of the parties, that party which was not present at the reformulation of this rule a week ago. And because there have been substantive changes to this that cause a very, very great concern, I have no doubt that the rule as submitted today is fair. I have no doubt that the objections to that rule are also fair and well-intentioned. it seems quite clear to me that without clearing up of these issues, that adopting this measure today is dangerously premature. And I would propose an alternate resolution to postpone this hearing, discussing or voting on this matter until January, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Commissioner O'Donnell, that's a motion to amend to
Correct.
postpone until January. Is there a second to the motion to amend the main motion?
I'll second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
By Commissioner Fielder. The question, so we then will have discussion on the question to amend, which would result, if the motion passes, would amend the main motion to not submit the rule to the Secretary of State, but rather postpone it until January. So the floor is now open to discussion on the motion to amend the main motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Fielder.
Commissioner Fielder.
thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. The reason I seconded this motion, and I'm going to support it, is that while I really appreciate the former Representative Zolnikov and the bill sponsors' desire to get this done, I know it's been a long, protracted process. And I can understand, being a former legislator, I can understand the frustrations that he must be feeling with this not being resolved more quickly. But I am quite alarmed by the serious concerns that were expressed by both of Montana's major utilities today. I'm concerned with the extreme pendulum swings we've seen in this rulemaking process, where just a few weeks ago we had, the parties basically in the opposite sides of whether we should adopt this or not, and now that's completely turned on its head and gone the opposite direction. I do have concern that because of the extreme shift in the tack this has taken, that we should continue to allow this to move forward in an open public process rather than rush into adopting something today that will then be tied up and settled by the courts. I'd much rather have it settled by either the commission or the legislature itself when it comes back into session, rather than have the courts decide the matter, especially since the courts do not have the expertise at their disposal that the commission has. So I really appreciate the effort that's gone into this by the parties and by our staff. I think there's a lot of really good work that has been done. I just don't feel it's quite ready for adoption today, and would be best served. I think everybody would be best served if we go ahead and do not adopt today and allow this to go into the moratorium period and then revisit and get this right in January. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Other discussion in the motion, Commissioner O'Donnell.
Thank you. So three terms that I wrote down to me are significant in this, and one is the reference to adequate notice, and then the word surprisingly different. And so I think they run contrary to each other. If something is surprisingly different, just a few days is not adequate notice on this. So I really feel that this is rushing it quite a bit to do a little twist at the very, very end. I would also, and I sincerely appreciate the intent of the legislature and their goals and all of that. It gives me pause, though. The legislature makes laws. Utilities make energy. And I think that is a highly complicated business. It was been referred to about the expertise of this commission. We don't have engineers here. We don't have a whole department of accountants. We don't have any of these resources that way. And I'm awfully damn proud that we don't have any responsibility for keeping the lights on. That's their responsibility. Our our role is limited to oversight, regulatory oversight, but not the day-to-day function. When the utility, this commission is necessarily in an adversarial position. Okay, but that doesn't mean we have to treat the utilities in all cases as an adversary. It's our job to make balanced judgments. As I say, I have no doubt that these rules are good and sufficient. I just think that there hasn't been sufficient time to vet them carefully, Mr. President.
Commissioner O'Donnell, Commissioner Pinochi.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson, Vice President Johnson. So I have a few points to ask the staff to go over with me. The ratepayer is very concerned about lawsuits and the cost of lawsuits at the commission, and they're asking that I try to avoid them. Do you feel that if we don't give, say, Northwestern some proper time to have some discussion, maybe a hearing on these recent changes, that a lawsuit could be filed?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Pinochi, I think we heard comments from Northwestern this morning that the current rulemaking would, and I hope that I'm quoting accurately here, trigger litigation. So I think Northwestern has answered your question on that particular front. If your question to staff is about the merits of that litigation or the litigation position of the agency, of Northwestern, of other parties that might participate in that, I would be really cautious about addressing those questions in this particular forum, because that is legal advice that I'd be providing to you all as commissioners, and there would be no attorney-client privilege if I were to provide that advice in a public forum like this.
So let me follow up a little bit. Do you feel that if we were to hold this off until January, that we might avoid those lawsuits?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioner Pinochi, I couldn't say. I think that the question of whether or not a lawsuit is filed depends on what the final rule looks like that the commission adopts.
I'll follow up, Mr. One. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about if Northwestern is going to take a look at protecting the ratepayer by installing the gas-fired plant in Laurel, or perhaps getting a greater share of coal strip. If I am listening carefully, Northwestern is saying that they will not be able to do that, either one of those, if we go forward with these rule changes. Is that the way you understand it? And do you think that is the case? Is there truth to that?
Mr. Chairman, I know I've been answering these questions the last few, but if you don't mind, I'd like to pass that one over to regulatory.
Mr. Vice Chairman, Commissioner Pinochi. I guess I would answer that by saying the staff is fully confident that these rules can be implemented in a way that allows the utility to acquire those resources that ensure adequate, reliable service to its customers. Without speaking to any particular resource that may appear, in front of the commission at a future timeline for a decision on its prudence or rate recovery. But we fully believe that these rules accommodate the utility's obligation to provide adequate, reliable service at just and reasonable rates.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Follow up. So Northwestern made it clear that just recently in September, the ratepayers had to pay $10 million. that they would not have had to pay if they had a greater share of, say, coal strip or the gas plant was operational. The ratepayer is very concerned about the rates going up. I cannot support anything that would block resource adequacy gains for Northwestern that would protect the ratepayer from tens of millions of dollars of charges. Are the chances better that they'll be able to have greater resource adequacy by either building the gas plant or having a greater share in coal strip if we wait until January or not?
So, Mr. Vice President, Commissioner Panochi, I don't think that the decision on these rules today, these rules aren't designed to influence in some way Northwestern's existing or current efforts to procure or complete the procurement or construction of the Laurel Generating Station, if that's what you're referring to. I've worked with the commenter from Northwestern for a long time. I have a lot of respect for him. I confess that I'm somewhat confused about, I guess, the point he was trying to make there. I don't think there's anything in these rules that precludes, again, the utility from acquiring those resources that are necessary to achieve resource adequacy. The rules are focused on ensuring, where possible, the use of competitive processes, which are designed to minimize costs for customers. So if the idea is to identify those resources that provide adequate, reliable service at the least cost to consumers, that's what these rules are designed to do. That's what the statute was designed to do. The transparency in the competitive procurement process, the structure around how bids are going to be scored, the ability for bidders to understand how they're going to be scored is designed to ensure that the competitive process is robust, that there's confidence by potential bidders in that process so that they're willing to bid, all with the idea of identifying a full and complete set of plausible resources that could be acquired by the utility to fulfill that obligation to provide adequate, reliable service and to do it in a way that minimizes the cost for customers.
No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Panochi. President Brown, have you got any questions or comments?
Yes, I do. Thank
Cool.
you. Thank you, Chairman Johnson. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to oppose Commissioner O'Donnell's motion to kick this matter down the road for several more months. I appreciate the spirit in which Commissioner O'Donnell was offering his motion, but I think the motion and the discussion related thereto is taking the eye off the ball, so to speak. So I would urge my fellow colleagues to understand what the purpose of what we're doing or attempting to do here today is, all right? So in 2019, the Montana legislature passed House Bill 597. That bill directed us as the Public Service Commission to engage in rulemaking and to implement House Bill 597. So we were given a legislative directive to do rulemaking and accomplish rulemaking that implements that legislation, okay? That is what we are tasked with doing. So with that being in mind and at the forefront, I believe as Mr. Rosequist just well articulated, the set of draft rules that we are considering today meet and satisfy what we have been directed to do by the Montana legislature. No more, no less. Okay. So that's the substance of my comments related to the substance of the rulemaking. Now let me talk about process. I'll remind my colleagues again that we have been directed since 2019 to engage in this rulemaking, 2019. I'll repeat it one more time, 2019. We are in September of 2022. We have had one legislative session pass in the interim. We have engaged in discussions with the parties and for a substantive amount of a time, in fact, well over a year. We have had various drafts of this proposal that have been put out for public comment. We have had, at this point, the ETIC committee take a look at what we're looking at today. I have no concerns, none, zero concerns about losing a lawsuit on a process question. We have provided adequate public comment. This is not discounting in any way the concerns that have been raised by the utilities. The reason I will oppose this motion and support the underlying motion, which was to adopt staff recommendation, is because I believe we at the Public Service Commission have now met our legislative obligation to engage in this rulemaking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, President Brown. Let me say that over the time I've spent in this commission, one of the most frustrating situations I've found myself in is when we're faced with a question that leaves us to choose the least worst alternative that's available to us. And this is one of those situations. I certainly lament the fact that the legislature has placed upon this commission a truly artificial and arbitrary time constraint with regard to the October 1 deadline for rulemaking. I think that is frankly doing a great disservice to us and to the process at hand. I also want to say that I'm absolutely convinced that neither the proponents nor the opponents to the current rule have in any way misstated or overstated their views, their concerns with regard to the rule. Having said that, there clearly are great differences that remain. I would also point out that we have very recently opened a docket to investigate the question of resource adequacy within the state and within the region. And I believe, given the fact that we can't, if in fact the motion is amended and passed and the rulemaking process is postponed till January 1, I believe that investigative docket, in fact, could be a real asset in terms of informing the commission as to how we can resolve these rather stark differences between the proponents and the opponents. So I will reluctantly support the motion to amend the main motion. Is there further discussion? Is there further discussion? Excuse me, President Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I will just comment at this point that I think it is a grave error for the commission to delay acting on this rulemaking any further, and I will stand on that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is there further discussion? The motion is to amend the main motion to postpone action on this rule until the 1st of January. And I am going to suggest that implicit in that motion is that there will be ongoing discussions with the parties between now and that date. Is that something that legal and regulatory staff would concur with?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be helpful from my perspective if staff had clear direction on whether the commission would like to proceed with publishing a notice of amended proposal. Excuse me, I butchered that term, an amended notice of proposed rulemaking that would walk through some of the
Okay, well, we will, I then assume deal with that, assuming the main motion is amended, and then we'll have discussion on the amended motion. All right, so the question of the commission, Commissioner O'Donnell.
One last thing. I wanted to point out that I agree with President Brown that Mr. Rosequist's explanation was very, very good. I would point out that he said that he was confused about the testimony of Mr. Hines right there. And it's that confusion that gives me pause to think that we need more time to understand each party, understand each other. Thank you.
Vice President Johnson, let me just clarify. I think Commissioner O'Donnell has misstated Mr. Rosequist's remarks, and I'll leave it at that. I do request a roll call vote on this, Mr. Vice President. Thank you.
Without objection, is there further discussion of the motion? Further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, we will call the question. President Brown.
No.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
Aye.
Commissioner Pinocci. Commissioner Fielder.
Aye.
And I will vote aye. The motion to amend is adopted. We now will move to discussion of the amended motion. Mr. Hamilton, if you would like to again state those elements you feel need to be addressed as we move forward with this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioners, I think it's important for the direction to staff to be clear here about what the commission would like to do in terms of taking what appears before you and what is only a draft notice of adoption.
Mr. Vice President, I'm going to object at this point. Commissioner O'Donnell's motion was clear to defer this matter until January of 2023. Was it not?
The question, Mr. President, is whether or we were deferring action on the rule. The question is whether or not, in fact, we're going to direct staff to engage in discussions with regard to the issues that led us to this decision. I don't think it's inappropriate to determine whether or not the intent of the motion was to lead to those kinds of discussions. I agree that action on whatever happens to the rule is postponed until the first of the year, but I don't think, I was just hoping we make clear that that didn't preclude ongoing discussions with regard to what that ultimate version of the rule would look like.
Well, Mr. Vice Chairman, I think you've led us into a procedural morass here, but I will let it proceed. Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton.
Mr. Chairman, to the president's point, if the direction of staff is that we do not publish anything at this point, we defer even considering the notice, an amended notice of proposed rulemaking until January. That's clear. That's clear to me. I think that's clarity for staff about what you would like us to do in that intervening period. And that's totally fine with me if that was the intent of the motion.
Well, is it the suggestion that this is an issue that cannot be dealt with through or in the course of the investigative docket on resource adequacy? What ultimately these rules should look like? Are we prohibiting that discussion?
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't believe that the commission's motion, as I currently understand it, would prohibit any further discussion in the context of the investigative docket of resource adequacy. To be clear, the only thing that I want to make clear is that staff will not be submitting an amended notice of proposed rulemaking in the foreseeable future, or as a result of this motion.
I have no issue with that, and if that's what President Brown was speaking to, then we actually don't have a difference here. President Brown?
Well, that was Commissioner O'Donnell's motion, and that's what my colleague supported. And so that's where we're at.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'd like to clarify the intent of my motion was that it was premature to reach a decision today. But I think I pointed out adequately from my point of view that it was because the proper amount of discussion and agreement had not been reached. So inherent in my intent was that discussions continue along this regard, that perhaps by January that there be something that was acceptable to all parties. And let me say, even if something is not acceptable to all parties, okay, as long as it's threshed out and people hear everything and everybody is understood, then it is up to us to make a decision on this. And doesn't have to be something where everybody shake hands and kumbaya and all that type of stuff. Okay. But I think we need to go through that process, and the points raised were so significant. I think they need discussion. They need reconciliation. Thank you.
Is there further discussion of the amended motion?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Fielder.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I supported the motion because I'm just uncertain that we've got the appropriate solution here before us today. And with the concerns that were raised, I want to be certain, because this rule will have significant long-term impacts for the state of Montana. And while I appreciate Mr. Rosequist's explanation particularly, I just want to make sure that we are certain about this before we adopt it. And it is unfortunate that there's this moratorium that goes into effect October 1, but I'd rather get it right than rush into doing something. I know it's not rushing. I know we're not rushing. We've been working on this a long time, but the changes are so significant here at the last hour that I really just am not comfortable with going forward today. And it is my intention and understanding of this motion that we will be able to continue to flesh this out and bring a recommendation to the commission that we can all fully understand, and that, you know, we've had time to address or examine the opponent's concerns that they raised today. I want to make sure that we get those thoroughly fleshed out before we adopt.
Thank you, Commissioner Fielder. Is there further discussion of the amended motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Pardon me?
Roll call vote.
President Brown?
Roll call vote.
President Brown?
No.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Aye.
Commissioner Pinocci?
No.
Commissioner Fielder?
Aye.
I will vote aye. The motion passes 3-2 with Commissioners Pinocci and Brown dissenting. Seeing no further business to come before this commission, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.